Asterisk, I told him. Michael, I made a mistake and I want to put it behind us. He agreed, but when I revealed. Somehow, someway, I wish desperately that I could atone for my sins all at once, but I know that's not possible because I keep reliving this abyss I created all by myself, for myself. Hello, Reddit. My name is Vivian Howard. I'm 34 years old and I'm a lecturer. Sorry, I used to be since I technically half resigned and was half fired. Don't worry, I'll explain what I mean later. So, I lived in Houston, Texas with my husband Michael and our 2 beautiful kids, Alicia and Max. Yes, I use the past tense because I don't, or should I say can't, live with them anymore since they all hate me now. You're probably wondering what I did to lose them, so I'm here to confess my sins. Let me start from the beginning. I already introduced myself. So, I have always been a curious person, even as a kid. My mother would tell me funny stories about how I would get injuries, and still wouldn't mind until I satisfied my curiosity. I was never one to sit around, I was always looking for something to do. Whenever I had questions in my head, I wasn't satisfied until I answered them, and that had often gotten me in trouble as a child. Though the trouble it got me into now makes me wonder if trying to answer all questions was worth it, because some questions are better left unanswered. My curiosity got the better of me, and I ruined what I had. My perfect life became imperfect within a few minutes, and it landed a scar that I don't think has any possibility of going away. Well, my curious nature helped at some point in my life because it made me one of the best, career-wise. I came out of high school with the best results and even got a scholarship to study at the college of my choice. It was in my final year that I met Michael. I knew him through a friend of mine who hosted her birthday party, and he was invited too by a friend of his. He would always say it was love at first sight for him, but it wasn't so for me. I didn't believe in falling in love just by seeing someone. Yes, we had chemistry, but it was all sexual for me. It made me curious to know why I did, because prior to him, I hadn't felt that way with anyone. So, seeing that I could with him made me curious. It took a while for Michael to convince me to be with him. But when I eventually did, it was so easy to fall in love with him. Michael was literally the sweetest guy. He was kind, caring, and very romantic. He would surprise me with random dates and also spoil me silly with gifts. We were so in love that everyone, our friends and family, knew we were together and were eventually going to get married. So when Michael proposed on our graduation, I didn't even hesitate to say yes. Michael didn't want any big celebrations. He just wanted something simple with just friends and family to celebrate our day and share our love, and so did I. So our wedding was quite small and simple, but it was very beautiful and memorable. I remember very easily that I had worn my mother's wedding dress. It was adjusted to my size as I was slimmer than my mother. Michael had gotten one of his suits, and we had a small wedding in my father's old church that he attended. We obviously didn't have much then because we had just graduated and weren't working yet, but at the time it really was beautiful and amazing because all that mattered was our love. We didn't even have a cake. But then we were still happy. Michael had said he didn't want us to be separated and had promised my dad he would take care of my needs and help me achieve my dreams, however big they were. And things were hard for us at the beginning as a new couple, especially since we were only just starting our lives, and we had barely enough and almost no means of income. But we were each other's strength and happiness, so it didn't matter then. Despite having one of the best results at school, it was hard getting a job. Michael had to start doing part-time jobs to be able to provide for us both, but when I realized that I couldn't leave everything to him, I got a part-time job too, against Michael's will. After I got the job, everything became a little better, but it went back again and became worse when, a few months into our marriage, I became pregnant. I had to quit my job because I was getting so sick so often. It was almost impossible to do anything, let alone work. Michael started working twice as hard for us. It wasn't easy. I started to get tired and frustrated. Why? Because Michael was a proud man. My parents were financially stable, so it could have made things easier for us to ask them for some money, but he wouldn't even hear of the idea. He would keep reminding me of his promise to my dad and how he couldn't go back on it, and would always end up promising me more and more of what he couldn't do, not because he didn't want to, but because he just couldn't. I started to ask for fewer and fewer things from him because I saw how hard he worked to put food on our table and also save up for our baby. The day I gave birth to Max was the day Michael got a job. I mean, his dream job that he had been wanting all along. So it was a double celebration. From there, our lives got even better and better as he made sure there was nothing I wanted that I didn't get. I was a satisfied wife and a happy mother. And soon enough, I got pregnant again, this time with a girl, my girl Alicia. Max was just 8 months old and I was pregnant. At the time, I was disoriented and didn't know what to do, but Michael was a really caring husband and was supportive all through. Alicia's birth was difficult. I had an accident. I was hit by a motorcycle that suddenly lost control, and with me being heavily pregnant and due to give birth, the baby had to be taken care of first. But then she wasn't turned the right way. Michael wasn't there because he had traveled 2 days before, and since the baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks, we thought he'd be back before the baby was born, but that obviously wasn't the case. I almost died giving birth to her. And to this day, I still have the scar on my stomach to tell the story. Michael had rushed down, apologized profusely for not being there, and was very supportive through the healing process. I had PTSD, but I couldn't take antidepressants because I was breastfeeding. It was really a hard time for me. Funnily enough, despite the fact that Michael and I were each other's confidant, I couldn't tell him I had PTSD. Well, I didn't even believe it myself. It's only now that I'm rethinking everything and writing this that I realize that I really did have it. But honestly, how could I tell him that I hated the sight of the baby, and when she cried, I just wanted her to stop screaming? It was worse when I had to breastfeed her because I had to pretend I was a satisfied mother feeding her own baby when, in fact, in my head, I was screaming and wanting to hide away from the pain of her toothless mouth, dragging my nipples in her mouth. I guess he suspected, though, because he suggested therapy or maybe seeing a doctor, but I flipped, and that was our very first fight after 2 years of marriage. I didn't want to accept that I had trauma and just continued to bear with it. Michael was always trying, though. He would share tips on how to overcome it, buy me gifts, and take me on dinner dates occasionally while we hired a nanny. He was just all over the place, which I found irritating at first, but later realized he was trying to help distract my mind and help me. It helped me through everything. It was later that I discovered that Michael actually took therapy sessions so he could be able to help me with my PTSD. But as the bad wife and mother that I have become, I never even admitted that I found out so I wouldn't have to apologize for my behavior and also have to thank him. You're probably now wondering again when I lost everything or what hell I created for myself that I referred to earlier in my writing. Well, I had an affair. Yes, I know, but you'd have to understand me first before you judge me. Well, I met George at work. When the kids were 6 and 5 years old, I became very irritable, even to the kids. They avoided me as much as they could because I would snap and yell at them at the slightest mistake. I wasn't satisfied. I wanted to be free from the chains of being a housewife. I wanted to do something different aside from being a housewife. And when your curiosity gets the better of you and you begin searching for all your classmates and seeing them doing good as wives, mothers, and even working, it would probably do you no good. Because now I wish I had stuck to being a housewife, and an appreciative one, in fact. Maybe then I wouldn't have met my nemesis and become doomed. So, Michael, my ever-so-patient husband, had asked me several times what the matter was, but I wouldn't respond, as I didn't even want to share that with him. Maybe because even back then, the inner me had realized how selfish I was being. I started making calls and applying for jobs desperately without informing Michael, and luckily for me, should I say unluckily now, a distant cousin of mine had some connections, and within a week, I was employed as a lecturer. To say I was excited was an understatement. I was to resume 2 weeks after being offered the job, and since I hadn't told Michael about it, I became the sweetest wife he could have ever known and the most caring mother to our kids. Michael was so happy with the change that when I eventually told him, He was a bit sad I hadn't told him, instead of lashing out and also making calls behind his back, but he got over it quickly and said he wanted nothing but my happiness. I started working after those 2 weeks, and as a newbie, work was a bit harsh. Most of the students were rude, young, and particularly difficult to handle. I couldn't cope at first, but Micheal was always cheering me on in the background. He would give me a back massage when he got home, sometimes cook me dinner, and take care of the kids, especially in the periods when I had to mark scripts. I got used to it very soon, and it became easier. Years later, I was almost a pro. I was good at teaching, and I actually enjoyed it. Everything was also perfect with Micheal and the kids. Well, until George came into the picture, and everything became very difficult. To put it simply, George was my student, I know, but I'm not a child abuser. And George wasn't exactly a child. He was a transfer student, and he was specially put in my care. Wrong move, I know. Guess it was my mistake to get closer to him. Well, the thing is, the person who put him in my care was one of the most respected professors, and when he said he owed me, I was really glad. But I probably should have refused. But at that moment, it felt like a lifetime opportunity to impress the professor. And I wanted to make sure I impressed the professor so much that I got involved in everything about George, his classes, his other lecturers, and I even helped him move from the dorm to his own place when he complained about not being comfortable with other people. George was at first a very shy person, but when he got close, he became more outspoken, and he was very charming. One thing that attracted me more to him was that he challenged me a lot. Academically. He would ask questions that left me speechless, going back to my notes and doing research. I started to have less time for the kids and Micheal because I became engrossed in proving a point to George, and the questions became more and more so that the times I had in classes to answer his questions weren't nearly enough. So, when he asked us to meet for lunch under the guise that he wanted to get his questions answered, I guess as a curious person that I always was, and having to find out most of the answers for myself, I felt it was a privilege to be able to give answers to his questions. That was clearly a mistake. We started meeting up in the evenings too, more frequently than was necessary because I was sometimes busy in the afternoons at work. When Micheal noticed, he asked me about it, and I immediately came up with excuses and lies of the professors dumping more work on me than was required. Micheal believed me and was very supportive of me as usual. I felt guilty, but I shrugged it off. George was work-related, and we weren't even doing anything other than talking about different theories and arguing about them. Well, that obviously didn't last too long, as conversations started to shift from theories to personal matters. We started to talk about our past, and I obviously had more to say than he did. Or maybe it was just that he allowed me to do the talking, which I enjoyed. I felt like he was listening to me, and it made me feel special. Maybe because he was also young, and he found listening to me, an older person, more interesting than his peers. Before long, I was already telling him about my marriage and how, despite how much effort Micheal was putting into the relationship, I still didn't feel comfortable telling him certain things. In fact, I told him about the PTSD thing. I grew so comfortable with him that I began to visit him, and since he lived alone, it was easier. George was the sweetest guy, really. He was a listener, and he was really cute. When I started to notice that I was beginning to develop feelings for George, I didn't realize it until they had grown so much. By the time I realized I was deep into George was when I started thinking more about him, even when I was home with Micheal and the kids. I started waiting for his calls and occasional invitations to his home. The sexual tension between us was so much that when he, in fact, initiated the first kiss, I didn't hesitate, just wrapped my arms around him and continued. His kiss felt magical. I loved kissing him, and I couldn't stop thinking about him, even when I was with Micheal. Michael's kisses didn't feel special anymore, ... T had begun to feel like a kiss that's being exchanged between longtime friends and not my husband. Though, after that kiss, I had told him it was just a mistake that should never be repeated, but I obviously wanted more than just a kiss. But considering the cons, I was married with 2 kids, and I was way older than him. I could be his aunt or his older sister, but then try telling that to your heart and mind that were envisioning something else already, something that definitely wasn't with my husband. But I still tried to curb that side of me. Believe me when I say I tried really hard to curb it, but it clearly wasn't enough. I started by avoiding him and stopped our meeting outside of school. I also stopped taking questions from him. If he did ask in class, I would tell him to refer to certain textbooks for answers. I wanted not to ruin what I had with my husband, but when temptation keeps banging, not knocking. I mean, imagine having a mad sexual drive and not being satisfied by your own husband, because he clearly isn't the one you're imagining satisfying it with. I couldn't stop, no matter how hard I tried. I just couldn't help myself, and it was driving me crazy. If Michael noticed my behavior, he didn't say anything, and that was probably because he became extremely busy at work, trying to meet deadlines. That didn't help me because it was like I was desperate for attention, and I was getting none. It was one day, which I terribly regret now more than anything, that it all began. My affair with George, that is. He came to confront me in my office and ask why I'd been avoiding him. And well, I stuttered, stating all the reasons why we couldn't be together, but he wasn't having it and countered with one of his own. I guess being a historian must have helped. Eventually, I just stopped arguing, and when he kissed me, I didn't struggle and just went with it. I know I should have. But when you've craved something so bad, and no matter how bad and all the different reasons you couldn't have it, you just can't help yourself. We had sex that day, in my office, where anyone could have walked in. I know, I was crazy and stupid and all the bad adjectives you can find, but it was almost as if I couldn't control myself anymore, and I was being driven by my own desires. After the whole thing, I had adjusted my clothes and sent him out of my office with excuses of work so I could think clearly. But even after he left, I couldn't think clearly. I was still remembering how good it felt, and how it felt like I had been missing something all those years with Michael. I knew that one time was a mistake, but a repeat of the same incident clearly isn't, but I couldn't help myself but imagine doing it over and over again. The night of that day, Michael and I also had sex. I know, I'm crazy, but I wanted to check if it was just my body craving a one-time thing, but then it wasn't the same. Michael all of a sudden wasn't it. He didn't touch me like George did. I found myself comparing Michael and George, and in my head, at that time, George had more points. Funnily, Michael was everything I could ever pray for. He obviously never strayed once in our marriage and never gave me reasons to doubt him, and he, in fact, was the best father to our kids because he made up for when I wasn't available. But in my head, it just clearly wasn't enough. I was an unsatisfied wife, and so, therefore, it was very easy to fall into temptation over and over again. Yes, George and I continued our affair, wild and fun and all the things I never experienced inside my marriage. Maybe I should blame the fact that I never exactly had any other relationship apart from Michael up until we got married, and so I didn't exactly get the chance to explore. So with George, it felt like the perfect opportunity to do so, and I did, regrettably now. Funny enough, George didn't take me to dinner or buy me expensive things or help me with chores as Michael did, but I just found myself wanting to be with George rather than Michael. I would lie about work and go over to George's place, and we would do all sorts of things, not all sexual, but things I wouldn't even dare suggest to Michael. I was still in love with Michael, but I also loved George, or let me correct that, I was just obviously lustful. We were just so wild that it got to an extent that George followed my family and me for a vacation. Yes, you read right. Well, what happened was Michael probably noticed the shift in my attention and thought it was too much work and suggested a vacation. Well, a weekend getaway with the kids. And I couldn't say no because I know that would make him suspicious. I had gone that evening to George's place with the excuse that I wanted to get some things done, so I wouldn't have to be called in, and told him that we had to cancel our weekend plans. He had playfully suggested that he could come along, and I had laughed it off as a joke and shrugged it off. Not until Michael and I were at the beach with the kids and were playing happily together. I saw him walking towards me, and I didn't even know when I gasped and called his name out loud. My husband was surprised and looked between both of us and asked the obvious, "You know him?" question. I was so shocked I didn't even know what to respond with, but George was quick to respond when he brought his hand forward and shook my husband's hand. introducing himself as George and a student of mine. Then he quickly placed a kiss on both my cheeks and expressed his surprise at seeing me there too. Micheal offered for him to join us, and I was quick to decline and say he was probably there with someone. I remember my heart beating so fast I thought everyone could hear it when George looked me straight in the eye and said he was actually just waiting for his girlfriend because she was around. After he said his goodbyes and left, I still couldn't concentrate. I was so scared that everything was going to crash that day, and Micheal must have noticed I was distracted, and he asked why seeing my student disoriented me that much. I had come up with silly excuses, but Micheal didn't question me further. I had excused myself later that evening and gone in search of my lover. Things continued like that between us, and I was juggling my marriage life and my affair together. It was stressful having to lie all the time, but I couldn't bring myself to stop seeing George, and I still loved my husband. Well, one day everything eventually came crashing down. My worst fear happened, and I regret everything about that day. I still think about what I could have done or not done. Perhaps now I'll still have my marriage and my kids to myself, and possibly my job too. Well, that day, George came to my office as usual, and we were talking about his assignments. And then he walked towards me and kissed me, and then I was lost. I had forgotten that I hadn't even locked the door in my haste, and that was probably my worst mistake. Because Sam walked in. Well, George was really attractive, so therefore I had always seen girls around him, most especially Sam. Sam obviously liked George, and she didn't even pretend to hide it. She was always trying to flaunt herself in front of him. And at one point, that had made me so jealous. But George had reassured me that he didn't even like her. In fact, I was there one day when George had blatantly refused her and told her he had a girlfriend. So when she walked in on us, me on my desk half naked with my skirt lifted up and George on me, imagine my horror. I was literally doomed. Because Sam wasn't exactly the quiet type, and that meant I was already in for it. I didn't even know when I pushed George off of me. I just remember putting down my skirts and trying to run after Sam, who gasped when she saw our compromising situation, and had immediately taken a picture of us. But she quickly slipped out the door and ran out. I was doomed. What if she posted the picture and my husband saw it? That meant it was the end of marriage. George tried reassuring me that he would talk to her and beg her to delete the picture, but I still felt uneasy, so I sent him out of my office. I was very scared. All the things that could go wrong were playing off in my head, and I was getting terrified as time passed by. Sam contacted me the next day and blackmailed me. She told me she wouldn't post the picture if I gave her an A on the course and also gave her a huge amount of money. I nearly wiped out my savings to be able to get the money and sent it to her and also promised her an A on the course. Well, funnily, it was actually Sam and George that planned the whole thing. Shocked, right? Well, George was actually dating Sam, and they had been duping people like that for years. How did I know? That evening I was feeling really uneasy because I knew Sam could back out of the agreement, so I wanted to ease my nerves and went over to Sam's place without informing him prior to that time. I walked in on them arguing about the money Sam collected from me, and George was saying she should return half, and she, Sam, was accusing George of growing soft and asking if he was actually in love with me. I must have made a sound because that made both of them turn and look at me, Sam with a smirk on her face and George with guilt. I just walked out of there so shaken and went back home. When I got home, I was surprised to see Micheal still awake and waiting for me. And he asked me what the matter was, if I had sorted things out already, and I just knew I had to come clean. Sam wasn't going to back out until she got rid of me totally. She was probably going to send my husband a copy, and the school too. It was better I did it myself rather than him finding out from another person. I asked him to sit with me, that I wanted to say something to him, and he sat down, curious as to what I had to say. Maybe I shouldn't have said something, but I knew I had to. If I hadn't even had the affair, I wouldn't have even had to think about telling him, or not in the first place. I told him, "Micheal, I made a mistake, and I want to put it behind us." And he agreed. But when he heard what I did, the Micheal I had always known, my safe space, Michael and the ever so understanding and gentle Michael changed right in front of my very eyes. I cannot forget the glares and how he stood up almost aggressively. I knew that moment that if I had been a man, or if George had been there, he would have probably hit him or me. But Michael was no woman beater, so he just clenched his fists and drove them into the table right in front of me. I remember covering my lips with my hands to mute my screams. For the first time in our marriage, Michael looked at me with pain and disgust, and the tears from nowhere started to overflow. I couldn't bear the way he stared at me. Michael had had nothing except admiration for me since he met me. Seeing him like that drove a knife into my chest, twisting painfully by the second. I apologized on my knees and begged for forgiveness, for him to just forgive my one mistake, but apparently the mistakes were too big to be ignored as Michael, right there and then, told me that he wanted me out of his house and life by morning and didn't want to see anything that would remind him he once had a wife. Thinking back now, I think I dug a hole for myself because how could I have so casually said I made a mistake and wanted us to put it behind us? A mistake was when you're drunk and you drunk dial a wrong person thinking it's your husband. There was no mistake when you repeatedly decide to hurt your family by having an affair over and over again until you got caught. I went to work the next day to tender my resignation letter, but it seemed Sam was ahead of me, and she had already sent the picture through the school email to every student. How she got her hands on the school's email, I don't know. So that was why I said I half resigned and was half fired. And as I walked through the school, every eye was on me, looking at me in disgust for getting involved with my student, and possibly because I'm also married. Sam even sent me a copy of the picture too. She whipped up a story about how I seduced a student and how I had been extorting him too. I wanted to laugh, but even that came out dry. I wish all I did wasn't just cheat on my husband, and I had indeed gained financially instead of losing. And funnily enough, the school I worked for after a week sent me a court order. They were suing me for trying to destroy the school's reputation, and I exhausted all my savings paying compensation. I'm officially penniless and clearly without a husband and kids because I refused to leave the house and kept begging for forgiveness. But Michael just changed totally and couldn't even bear breathing the same air as I was. So he left with the kids with a promise that if I wasn't out by the end of the week, he'd sue me. So I'm here writing on this space to ask for help and advice. I truly regret what I did because eventually, the whole experience wasn't worth all that I'm going through now. And I sincerely do love my husband and wish he'd just forgive me and release me from my inferno. So please help. I need your advice on how to get my family back. Please. Update. Sigh. Hey Reddit, it's me again, Vivian. I thought I was ready for all the criticism I'd get here even as I wrote my life story, but I clearly wasn't. Funnily, in my twisted head, I had thought coming here to explain my side of the story would get me perhaps just one person with advice on how to go about everything, seeing as I have no one else to go to for that advice. My parents are long dead, I have no siblings and no friends too, as Michael was sort of my only friend and husband over the years, and I apparently lost even our friendship. But the hate and backlash I've received are, well, too much for one person to bear, honestly. I've lost everything. My life is pretty much over. I've lost my husband and my kids, and I don't even have any money. Michael left me with literally nothing when we got divorced, and of course full custody of the kids. Even the kids didn't want to be with their mom, and I wouldn't even blame them because Michael has been more of a parent than I was, while still juggling that with a demanding job and also a dissatisfied wife. I had to go find a new home, or should I say a dump yard, but that was what I could afford as I'm penniless. The noisiness and the unruly behavior there has been my company. Even at night, you could hear people shouting or sometimes fighting. It's really awful, and I only have myself to blame because I caused everything all by myself. The pain of having to live this life without knowing how my kids are, and also knowing I won't be involved in their everyday growth anymore. I'm sure when they will probably ask about their mother, when he does tell them that I'm no longer in their lives because of my affair, they'd probably choose to forget their conniving mother. That hurts me more than anything else. I can't even imagine how dreadful it'd be. I know Michael is a good dad, and would probably give them the best lives, but me not even having the privilege anymore is killing me slowly inside. I had to look for a job at a shopping mall as an attendant. I had to eat and pay bills, and I know for sure that I might never be able to teach again because of my ruined reputation all over. I know. I should have thought of the consequences before doing something so stupid, but I was selfish and I placed even my own desires above myself and damned all the consequences. Well, the consequences aren't damned right now. They're all pretty much at the surface and have exploded straight into my face. Oh, for those asking about George, I wouldn't know what he's up to because I cut all connections with him. But I heard sometime that he had transferred to another school again. But I don't know whether that was true or not. I chose not to confirm or try finding out. I don't blame him, honestly, if I hadn't been so stupid enough to think my marriage was worth nothing and think it was okay to give in to my urges. I would still be happily married and would have my kids with me. I miss them all so much, but I know I have no right to even be their mother after my selfish act. I cannot even bring myself to look for them, let alone ask for their forgiveness. Even if I cannot forgive myself, how then could I ask them to release me from the hell I created myself in the first place? All I can think of is how badly I've behaved, not only as a wife, but as a mother. I have never for once been interested in them other than yelling at them to be perfect prime kids. I don't even know their favorite colors. Thinking back now, I realize that I never spent time with them except on days Micheal was there with us. The days Micheal wasn't around, my kids moved around like robots, and like they were tiptoeing around me. I never bonded with them as a mother. I was more focused on what I couldn't have. I'm a stupid, stupid woman. I know for sure now. The painful thing is, I can't even earn back the right to be with them and right my wrongs. My life just can't get any worse. Update. Hello, Reddit. This is my very last post here, and I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to pour out my feelings. Despite the negative words and a few positive ones I've received, I'm still thankful for being able to express myself. Just so you know, it's been 10 months now, but I'm not any better. I've not done any form of healing either, because how can I really? When each day and every passing hour feels more horrible than the last. Me wondering how they are doing, if Micheal had found another woman who would this time love the kids unconditionally and would do with them all the things I couldn't do as their mom, that alone is agonizing. One time, I had gone to our house to sneak a peek at them and see how they were faring, and I saw my babies laughing and joking around while their dad worked in our mini garden, the place I never stepped foot in. It was a twist in the gut, and I just went back home and cried my heart out. Couldn't even bring myself to show them because I know the smiles would probably disappear on seeing me. It leaves me with only one conclusion. I'm a horrible person who will forever pay for her sins. Thanks and goodbye.